Hi, and welcome to our special podcast today. We have with us T.S. Smith, and Michael and I had heard T.S. story and really wanted you to be able to hear this story because it's important. And we probably won't be doing a lot of talking here because we want you to hear what T.S. has to say. So, welcome T.S. to our
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you so much.
And well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Please just kind of feel free to launch in to, you've actually been going around talking to different groups in Oklahoma about this particular topic. So why don't you just kind of launch in and tell us a little bit about what's been going on?
Okay. So a couple of years ago, my daughter had a mental health crisis. It was during COVID. A lot was going on for the kids at that time, home from school, social media, things like that. And I was very naive. I admit it, very naive about what was going on with gender ideology and, those kind of things. And had no idea that, she had been accessing a few things on her school computer when she was at home while I was working. And that's kind of hard to monitor. But also that just what the things that the kids were talking about and the grooming that was going on online around this. And in the meantime, she started getting very depressed and was having some issues. And so what we did was we went to a adolescent psychiatrist because we had tried everything. We'd been dealing. She was one of those kids that always had social anxiety, always had separation anxiety, things like that. She was a sensitive child. And so what they did was they said the first line of defense for depression in these kids is Zoloft, which is an SSRI drug. Well, there was a black box on there and I was very concerned about it, but they told me that, walked me through it and everything. Well, what I didn't realize is that if you have an underlying genetic disposition towards mental health issues such as bipolar or major depressive mood disorder or something like that, it's going to kick off a chain of events that you may never have known that you had your entire life, but the SSRI drug does kick that off. So she ended up going inpatient in the state of Oklahoma, where I learned so much about our very broken process and how it's sending kids out really with worse mental health issues. But when she was in there, they upped her Zoloft, they upped it when I kept telling them there was a problem, and they sent her home with a serotonin overdose going on, in her body. And she ended up going inpatient again to try to get that medication settled. Well, what I did not know is that she was being introduced to gender ideology while she was in the adolescent inpatient setting. And so when she went in again, they called me up and told me that she was having identity issues and that she was now a boy. And I was shocked. And they said that they practiced gender-affirming therapy, which I didn't know what that was either. And I said, she's got other issues going on. I don't understand where this even came from. And, I want to work on these underlying issues. And at that time, that's when we found out she was being groomed online, through a chat room by a pedophile. And I was trying to find, luckily we caught it very, very quickly. I tried to file reports with the Bureau of Investigation and all of that. But instead of that, they wanted to focus on the trans ideology. And I told them that this was against our faith, that this was not true. This came out of nowhere. So I started doing a lot of research, and there wasn't a lot of resources out there at the time. And I found a group, and they kind of guided me towards some things out there. And that's when I started reading about rapid onset gender dysphoria and some other things that were coming out. But these books and this information was being suppressed and banned at the time. And so what I did was, I did a lot of research on mental health, did a lot of research on this topic. and decided absolutely not, this is going to be the worst thing that could possibly happen. And so I refused to go along with it. And then at the very end of her stay, I actually got to talk to the psychiatrist, which you don't normally get to do. And he said, well, it's better to have a live son than a dead daughter. Now, she'd only had this persona for a month, and I didn't realize that, she had this, she had been talking about it at school or with her friends. And the story's actually still unfolding, because now I'm finding out there was a couple of girls, that we know throughout our neighborhood or whatever, from different schools, that were also going through this identity, and they were feeding off of each other. And it comes to find out several of them had also been through an inpatient facility. So when he said that to me, I thought back on the narrative and I said, no way, no way. And he kept coming back about suicide rates and all of that. And finally, when he realized I wasn't going to let it go, he said, well, I said, if this was your child, what would you do? He said, well, I don't have a dog in the fight. And if it was my child, I wouldn't give it any air. I would just ignore it.
Wow.
That set off a chain of events, because I said, this is wrong. This is wrong what you're doing to these children. And so she did end up, and she came home. We had her with a Christian therapist. She was doing okay. We were getting her pulled out of this. It's an indoctrination, really. And, we were working with her. We were very compassionate. We were working on underlying issues and exploring, everything that we could. And a Christian therapist was working for her and did a fabulous job. And she told us that she's now working with a lot of girls that are going through this issue, because it is a social contagion. And, well, she ended up going inpatient again because her meds still were not right. And I wanted her off this medication, but we were really having a lot of issues with it. And when she went back into another facility, I had no idea. They did not notify me that she had told them that she was trans again. And they socially transitioned her with names and pronouns. And I didn't know this till the paperwork came home. Well, I take that back. I had called up to the nurses station and had said, I'd like to get an update on my daughter. And they told me it was my son. And I said, well, I'd like to talk to the psychiatrist. And I was denied, that information. And when your child is going through a mental health crisis, there's only 50 beds in the whole state. So once they're assessed and it's decided that they need to move on to inpatient care, which is acute, 7 to 10 days, you lose your parental rights around this, because they're going to send that child to any bed that's available in the state. And if there's not a bed available, they'll stay in the ER until there is one, which could be a couple days, or the state will now pay for transport to take you to another state to be able to access help. So that there's a severe crisis going on. You can only get a bed if you are just, having a real issue, and you can't go into residential treatment until you go through acute. And it's that same psychiatrist that will decide if you get a bed in the state of Oklahoma. So you don't have a choice on this. And when they sent her this one facility, and the first thing they do is ask, well, the second or third question is, are you trans? And they'll say yes or no. And then they'll ask, well, what is your identity? What is your identity? What does that matter? I don't understand why this, and it goes in their medical file, and it follows this child for the rest of their life in this medical file. And so she could say, she says, no, and then as soon as you walk back behind those doors, they'll turn around and say, no, actually I am. But what happens is, my daughter told me it's a trend. It's very trendy for middle school girls to come up with the nicknames and, all of that. And they don't understand, that they're just going through puberty, and they don't really understand all these terms and pansexual and non-binary, and all of that. And so they're trying to make sense of it. But when you get into these facilities, she said, all the girls there identify. It's a popular thing. It makes you feel special, and you get all this special attention, and, it's a way to connect with the other kids. And she said, I really wasn't. I just made it up on the spot because I wanted to fit in with the other kids. But what they do is they streamline them into topics about coming out in the trans story, and all of that. And then all of your therapy sessions now revolve around exploring that, your family therapy, and all of that. And so when she got home from that and I saw the paperwork, I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked because I had told them in the very beginning, look, she had an issue at this other place. She's come out of it. It was something that, and it's like an eating disorder or self-harm. Usually they separate those girls out because it is a social contagion, but they don't do that with gender. Well, after that, I thought, this is not fair. I had no access to my child. I couldn't talk to her about it because she didn't want to. And that's up to the child if they want to talk to you on the phone or whatever. And I didn't even know, to be asking. And so at one point, there was a facility in Texas that gave me a form about a parent acknowledgement form. And I sent that to our senators and said, this should be happening in Oklahoma. Every parent should have the right to know that these facilities or a school counselor or a school therapist is going to be introducing your child to gender identity, ideology, but also that they will be practicing gender-affirming therapy. And when I asked them at the inpatient facility, I said, well, what is gender-affirming therapy? And they said, well, it's informed consent. So if the child tells us that this is what they are, then that's what they are. And we have to follow their lead on that. And it's from the CDC guidelines. So this is a federal issue. And so when I started, when this was happening in real time, I was contacting, Rachel Levine had just come along. And I started writing my legislators, like, I don't understand how this is happening in Oklahoma. And people didn't believe me. They absolutely did not believe me. And, so as we went through that and I was working, along with the Christian therapist, and she was shocked. She was shocked that this was happening. She had no idea. And then we went to discover a lot of the older therapists that are starting to retire did not realize that this gender-affirming process had taken place, which has been dictated by federal policies and federal money that Oklahoma accepts. And so as we were going through all this, that's when I really started doing a lot of research. And I started talking to hundreds of parents across the country in other states that were also going through this. And I was looking for a facility out of state and realized that not one single facility exists that does not practice gender-affirming therapy. And in some states, California, New York, Oregon, Washington, they have literally outlawed exploratory therapy and call it conversion therapy. So now the parents and the therapist can no longer practice anything except gender-affirming therapy. And if a parent doesn't go along with it, they can now lose custody of their child because now it is considered child abuse. So that's where it's at.
I'm trying not to interrupt you, but I'm getting so angry. I can't even, my eyeballs are starting to bleed. So can I just ask you a couple of questions before we get too far? Do you mind?
Yes.
Okay. So you said that you first kind of this came into your perspective after your daughter had been on her computer, her school computer.
She started talking about words that I didn't know. And I would ask her, like, what does that mean? Like non-binary or, something like that. And she was trying to talk about it, and the concepts just didn't make sense because they don't make sense. And I was like, well, where are you hearing this? And tell friends, whatever. And so we just happened to have a pediatrician appointment. And I brought it up. I said, I've been hearing these words and I don't understand them. And I'm wondering if you have some perspective on this gender identity stuff. And he said, well, I believe in two sexes. I believe in two biological sexes, male and female, and that you can be gender non-conforming. You can have short hair or explore, wardrobe styles and things like this. But at the end of the day, there's two sexes. I had no idea.
That one.
I had no idea how controversial that was at the time, because they're not allowed to say that anymore. That was very controversial. I had no idea. And so when she went inpatient, I said, look, the pediatrician told me there's only two sexes, that this is just, this isn't anything. And she's been working with a Christian therapist who also says this isn't anything. She has no diagnosis of gender dysphoria. She has no history with this. She's got depression and she has anxiety, and it's COVID. And we had a loss in our family of somebody that was close to her. And, we had stuff going on. And they were like, it doesn't matter. We have to practice gender-affirming therapy on everybody.
Wow.
So the other question that popped up was when you were talking about the fact that when she first went into inpatient, basically you had to call the nurse and then nobody was allowing you to talk to the doctor. So is it state law that you lose your parental rights if your child goes inpatient psychiatry?
Well, what happens is once that decision is made, you cannot prevent the child from going. So you cannot leave with the child. The state transports the child to the facility, and you arrive and you check them in and everything, but you don't get any decisions. And at one point I said, please don't send her back to that facility. She'd already been there. It made her mental health worse. And I knew that the program that existed now, they have a special program just for LGBTQ kids. And that I just said every time it makes her mental health worse. And that's when they said that they would call CPS if I didn't allow her to go. And I said, well, what would happen if you call CPS? And they said, well, they'll have a sheriff here, and she'll still be going to take that bed. And that's when I realized. And I had her on a waiting list in Texas at one of the top facilities in this part of the country. And I called them and they said, but I'd been on the waiting list for a couple of months trying to get her out of the state. And they said, drive tonight, get her here. We have a bed for her, and she's already clinically approved. And so I told them, look, I've got this bed in Texas. It's one of the top facilities. I just have to get her there. I will pay the state for transport. I will do whatever I need to get her there. And they would not release her. And this was a particular hospital where they said they're not allowed to send anybody out of the state of Oklahoma, and that they have to send them inpatient. And I thought that was maybe a law in Oklahoma, not realizing that the state actually does pay for transport to go out of state. So I was lied to, basically, or misled. And
no, it sounds like lied to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I have discovered through all this process is a lot of employees don't really know. I feel like I know a little bit more than a lot of the people, because nobody really punches above their pay grade, right? So one hand doesn't know what the other one is doing. And you may have a new employee or somebody that's, getting off shift and they don't want to mess with it, or whatever. So, yeah. And then, so once she was in the facility, I said, I do not want to practice gender-affirming therapy. I don't have a choice. I didn't have a choice.
So how did she get to the point that you got her inpatient? Did you seek
where
that
was
out?
The first contact? Like,
yeah.
That's what I'd like to know. Like, who was the first
psychologist? We were at the pediatrician. The first time we were at the pediatrician's office. We were at the pediatrician's office.
Well, like even before, was there like a school indication or a school incident that prompted to go there, to like go to your private position?
She started struggling at school. During COVID, we realized that there was a lot of issues going on, that she was very behind in her academics, and she had started middle school. And now, knowing what I know about things, she was a lot of these kids that are sucked into this ideology are most vulnerable children. They have autism, ADHD, mood disorders, sexual assault, things like that. Some very serious, underlying issues that if you can just implement healthier coping skills for when, they're having issues, they won't go down this, ideology, but they're being lied to and told these are going to solve all your problems. If you don't feel right in your body, this is going to solve your problem, because you can just change your body. And so this is what is being fed to the children. And so when she started middle school, she just imploded because she had like 5 different teachers, 5 different topics. Yeah. She was she was behind in her reading. She was behind in her math, especially after returning to school after COVID. And she felt like she was, getting bullied and some things like that. And so her stress level was just through the roof. And we've been working with the pediatrician and everything. And finally, that's when they said, we think we should put her on Zoloft because her depression is very worrisome. And it was. And so that's what we did. And she started having a lot of problems right away with it. And so we went to the pediatrician because she had, she developed a tic, and it was something unrelated, but she had developed something. And so we went to the pediatrician just to make sure that, there was nothing going on with it. And now what they do at these pediatrician, at all doctor's appointments now, at the end, they say, do you feel suicidal? And if they say yes, do you have a plan? And so she said yes, that she did. And so he stopped the appointment immediately, and they had to call a security guard, and they walked us over to the ER. And then we sat at the ER and we waited for the mental health assessment. We ended up being at the ER for probably about 10 hours before they found a bed, and then they sent us, on. And that was my first experience. So, you're scared. You don't want your child to, you got a lot of stuff going on, and you're just kind of like following whatever anyone says. But after I went through the process many times, I realized, well, a lot of times you can just call, that when your child needs help and when they don't. And so you try to head it off at the pass a little bit so that they don't end up going to the ER where you lose your parental rights, and all that. So what I discovered is you can actually call the facilities yourself and say, do you have a bed? And if they say we might have one in the morning, then you can just go and wait. And you'll get there, and there's probably 3 other families sleeping on the lobby floor trying to get that same bed. So, but you don't have to go through the ER and, pay all that money. We have insurance, that helps us out with that. So that's when I discovered, wow, they literally will call CPS on me if I try to stand in the way of this.
I can't. I just can't. I'm so mad because you're trying to do the right thing. And then sorry, Michael,
but
you had a
what
question.
I discovered, so after going through this process a few times, nobody holds your hand. There's nobody to hold your hand, to walk you through what's available to you. Nobody talked to me about intensive outpatient services or partial hospitalization programs or anything like that. I had to find it on my own. My daughter did end up going to a partial hospitalization program, which is half-day therapies and half-day school. And that service is very much needed in the state of Oklahoma. You can only access that if you're coming out of acute or residential care. And so then that's going to lead me into the public schools, what's going on, with that. And so these services, they do a public school. 3 teachers will come from school into a therapeutic classroom setting at the facility, and they work at their own pace, and the teacher's there to help them, but also they can implement their coping skills that they're learning in their therapies in the mornings. And it's to streamline them back into, school. And so what's happened, and it's a very good program, very, very needed. And I want to reiterate, the parents that I talk to that deal with the mental health in Oklahoma, the system is broken. There's not enough beds. There's not enough intervention crisis. There's no help with getting coping skills or diagnosis or anything like that. And those intensive outpatient and the partial hospitalization programs are just key for the younger kids to get them those services early before they're adults and head down the road of drugs and alcohol, and things like that. But when my daughter's in these facilities, it's mostly kids, she was very protected, innocent, had a childhood innocence and had never really had any kind of traumatic event or anything like that. And she's in there with foster children who had devastating lives. She's in there with kids her age who have already coming off of heroin and fentanyl, that are on their way to court, that have been stabbed by their parents. I mean, some very, very serious situations. And she's still trying to unravel that. She's still trying to process, things that she was exposed to. And there's no place in Oklahoma that you can just go and say, knock, knock, my kid needs help. a private facility or anything like that. And we were trying to get her out of state and looking at these facilities. People pay, by the way, like $8,000 to a consultant to help them place their child outside of Oklahoma. Like, this is big business. And these facilities charge $18,000 a month.
Well, let me just
in their house.
Yeah, let me just say this. I don't talk about it because I haven't reached the point that I'm willing to talk about it too much, but we have a child who's mentally ill. And we found out that this was the case very early on in her life, about 4th, 5th grade. And we tried valiantly to get her some help. And it was unbelievably, she is adopted. And, you know, if we had, it was a private adoption out of the country. And if we had an adoption inside the state, we would have had access to some help. But otherwise, we had no access to help, and it had to come out of our budget. And like you said, it was unbelievable. We were being given prices like $13,000 to, you know, to have her actually have an intake that would actually be able to diagnose her appropriately. So, and that was, oh gosh, that went all the way back to 2008, I guess, 7 or 8. So this has been ongoing forever. I mean, I hate to say it's nothing new, but yeah, we were introduced to that very early on, and it's ridiculous. If you don't have money, you don't get your kid help.
No. And what I discovered through this process, because I called probably facilities in every state, is that a lot of states now have an informed consent of the child of like 13, 14 years old, that they don't have to allow the parent into the process of mental health. And a lot of these states don't even have lockdown facilities, so the child can check themselves out. And they don't even have to tell the parent that the child ran away. And so finally, I was talking to a facility in Utah, because they're kind of a powerhouse in this industry. They have a lot. And finally, I was learning how to talk around the gender stuff. Like, do you use legal names? Are you biologically, are the groups biologically separated? Things like that. And finally, a lady told me, she said, we legally have to practice it, but we can get around with legal names, things like that. But the problem is, the kids talk about it, and you can't stop that. You can't stop the kids talking about it, so you cannot stop the social contagion that's happening. And so then I talked to a lot of Christian facilities, and they said, either that we don't take the kids dealing with the gender identity crisis, or we take maybe 1, 2 at tops, because anything beyond that, it does create a social contagion. And so, and now that other states have outlawed exploratory therapy, they've outlawed, parental consent, that you even have to tell the parents what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. It's totally cut the parents out of this conversation. And these kids their mental health is spiraling. It is just spiraling. And other people, like teachers and school counselors, think that they know more than the parent. So the parental rights on this is massive.
Yeah. Well, where does, so you initially, everything was private. You're going to your own doctor, seeking out private therapy.
Yes.
Where does the state come in to cut those parental rights and kind of take over, or let the child kind of dictate? Is that just at that first private level?
The second that they get that mental health assessment that they are in crisis and need to move on to acute care, that is when the state takes over.
And so that was when you went to the pediatrician, and she said, I'm suicidal. The pediatrician said, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah. And when you do teledoc, or, any of that stuff, which, we had tried during COVID and everything, as soon as you say anything about ideation, they immediately will stop the call and say, you need to call 911, and they will not continue on in the session. Wow. So it's very, very difficult to get help for a child who may be experiencing some kind of ideation, especially if it's been triggered by Zoloft or an SSRI drug. That is one of the side effects. And none of the hospitals were telling me this was a side effect. And then at one of her last days, they did give a handout, talking about the side effects of Zoloft, and that the pharmaceutical companies say, well, it's not proven, but people say that they've had this experience. Well, I looked at the side effects, and that's what she had been experiencing, every single side effect that was listed on that, on the Zoloft. I never would have put it on her, had realized, and then they just throw more and more meds at it.
Yeah.
And you don't feel I didn't feel qualified really to do the medications, and all of that at the time.
So you were saying something about public school, about
Yes.
the counselors in public school that you found out.
Yes. So as I start really researching this gender-affirming therapy, that is so key, because that is part of gender-affirming care. And everyone right now is talking about how banning the childhood sterilization law and all that, and the ACLU has filed a lawsuit. But what a lot of people don't understand is that there's many steps that happen before you get to that process. And one of them is planting the seeds of ideology, which is happening in the schools. And the second one is affirming the new identity with pronouns, new names, things like that. And so the farther, and then the adults all affirm, and so the farther the child gets into this identity, the harder it is for them to back out of it. And all the studies that have come out have been very shaky, not on good research, long-term research. It's very experimental, and other countries are now backing away from it, saying we've made a mistake. We have made a huge mistake, but the United States has decided to double down on this. And so what's happening now is the public schools, the Biden administration has created a lot of money is flowing to the public schools to implement these community clinics and mental health resources, that the public schools will be the ones to hand that out. And they're partnering with nonprofits to get around, any state laws or anything like that. And so I started really researching these nonprofits, and Amplify Tulsa and is the one in Tulsa. And they're partnered with some very activist, groups. And
Listen and
yeah. Well, what I found out about GLSEN is they're behind everything. I had no idea that they are behind absolutely anything you touch in your daily life, from classroom modules. Their whole goal, it's very openly stated, their whole goal is to provide gender-affirming care for every child without the parental knowledge, to get the parents out of the picture.
That's good old Obama's. That's good old Obama's. I forgot what czar he was. Some kind of czar, and his name was Ken Jennings. Yeah. So, and
so
he's behind
they came up. Amplify came up with the sex ed curriculum for Tulsa. They're a pilot program, by the way.
Right.
And so it's going to be coming to Oklahoma City next, and then after that, it's going to the rest of the rural areas. So it is going to end up being in every public school, and nobody's holding the line on this. So the middle school curriculum lesson number 1, it's already implemented, is understanding change, gender identity, and sexual orientation. 6th grade, they're already teaching the gender identity in Tulsa. And so as I started looking at these nonprofits, and I just started because I already knew the Department of Mental Health used a lot of Freedom Oklahoma as one of their resources, Trevor's Project, and they send the kids to the chat room. Click 3 times to shut down the website. Well, my daughter got groomed in chat rooms. So why is a mental health resource telling these kids to go to chat rooms? There's pedophiles waiting for them. And I'm not talking about gay or lesbian or anything like that. I'm talking about actual sex trafficking pedophiles. And, and you have to separate out the LGB right now from the T, because the gender and the sexuality are 2 completely different things. And I don't think people understand that. And a lot of these kids, if left alone, they might be gay, right? This is the true conversion therapy, is telling a child, you need to change your body and go on and be a lifetime medical patient. And if you're gay, that's totally separate, because you're not being told to modify your body and sterilize yourself. that is happening on the gender identity, queer theory, radicalization. And so now we've got this money flowing. A school board member had mentioned to me, I don't live in the area that she does. I don't know a lot about it, about these mental health contracts currently being signed. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? And she said, nobody's vetting them. Nobody knows what they are. It just says mental health, and it's millions and millions of dollars in money that is flowing towards this. And so I asked some very basic common sense questions, and she said, nobody can answer that. So I started digging around because I knew how the Department of Mental Health worked by this point, because I'd been through the system and I knew about gender-affirming therapy. And at this point, I know all the buzzwords in the code for what, certain things mean. And I was absolutely shocked at what I was finding. And that's when I discovered that the National Education Association, of course, as you know, it has been taken over by
a long time.
But also the National Association of School Psychologists, the National Association of School Counselors, and on and on and on. And so they've figured out how to implement this in every single facet of mental health and public school without the parents' knowledge. And so now what is happening is we have this money coming in. They're going to start, and nobody knows how do you decide what child gets these services? How do you know what the services are? How do you know that DHS isn't going to be brought in to this? Because now what we're finding out is DHS, Oklahoma DHS, also has affirming policies. And so a caseworker has to affirm the child regardless of their religious beliefs, regardless if they think so or not. But the child can now also be removed from the home if the family is not affirming the new identity. That's written right there in the Oklahoma caseworker guidance. So what we have now is we have Amplify Tulsa, Honestly OKC, Freedom Oklahoma, Equality Oklahoma, all these political activist groups being treated as mental health resources for the kids. And so two things just caught my eye. Like, this just happened the other day after I was learning about all of this. And there's actually a job position open. Well, let me tell you first what's happening in another state with these community clinics that's opening up at public school. This is in Ohio. With parental consent, a child can receive any and all health care services deemed necessary by the staff and provider agencies. Well, who's the staff? Who's deciding? Is it the teacher? Is it the counselor? I don't know. But without parental consent at age 13, access to reproductive health care services. I don't know if that includes abortion or not. I don't think that'd be an issue in Oklahoma. Drugs and alcohol, mental health services. It's pretty vague. I don't know exactly what that means. And be informed of outside options, including gender clinics. So the public schools are using these nonprofits and community partners in order to send the child over there, and then they can be sent to gender-affirming clinics. And Seattle Public Schools will now pay for that transition. And they don't have to inform the parent at all this is happening. And if the parent doesn't affirm, they can be taken and sent into a host home. And these states are now sanctuary states. So if a child from Oklahoma runs away, ends up in this state, they will put them in a host home to help them transition and do not need to notify the parents that they even have their missing child. And now Ithaca, New York is a sanctuary city within a sanctuary state. And if the child is on hormones, then the parents won't lose custody, but they can lose custody of their child if they're not allowing the child to go on hormones. So this is how extreme it has gotten, and it's creeping into this. It's already here in Oklahoma. It's just people don't realize it because they don't know what they're looking for. Cool. So I'm looking at age 13. Well, this is the federal money that's dictating this. So age 13, is that federal or state? I don't know. But then I just happened to see people screenshot me stuff now. People text me. They're always sending me stuff because they know that I'm the one that'll wave it around and send it off to who it needs to go to. Well, Oklahoma State Department of Education is hiring a school counselor specialist and a program manager for school-based mental health. So these are the mental health contracts we were just talking about. And as I mentioned, the radical nonprofits. One of the nonprofits on the Oklahoma County Health Department One of the resources is Advocates for Justice, and you click on it, and there's a 25-page packet on Muslim transgenderism, quoting Allah, on our Oklahoma County Health Department. Where's separation of church and state? Can you imagine if that said Christian resources and quoted Jesus Christ? Why is that on our county health departments? Who's approving these things? Who's
Well, I am
finding these?
wondering, is Ryan Walters aware, that they're hiring people for this?
He's got to be. He's got to know something that's going on in the public schools. And I think he is aware of these nonprofits. And I think they are very aware that there's rogue employees. But who signs off on this? Somebody approves it.
Yeah.
I don't know. They snuck it in. They're sneaking it in.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to ask, Jenny, that's what I was going to ask is, are these like getting backdoored into actual Oklahoma bills? Is it coming in from the Department of Education or like the guidance from the CDC?
All of it. It's guidance from the National Education, the Department of Education. It's guidance from the CDC, and it's all tied to federal funds. And we take these federal funds, and so it dictates, how this needs to be done.
Wow.
And so even though the state tried to outlaw the use of pronouns, and things like that, well, now it's farmed out to nonprofits. Why is a nonprofit in charge of writing our sex ed curriculum in our public schools? We didn't even have sex
ed. And we asked that at an interim for that even. Yeah.
And who's approving the nonprofits? Is money exchanging hands? Who's getting the money? How is this happening? Nobody seems to be able to answer these questions. So when I saw this program manager for school-based mental health, this is the person who's going to implement this program across the entire state. Like I said, Tulsa's the pilot, right now for all of this. So I'm looking at, what you need to be an expert in. It's ASCA student, ASCA. Well, that's social justice and gender identity. Okay, and then it's current counseling trends, current mental health trends. Well, what's a trend? Gender-affirming therapy. That's the trend. And so as you look through and read this, it's on their website or whatever. This is
that's from the State Department of Education.
Yeah. If you do not hold the line on who the person is going to be hired to do this, and you have a radical activist, it's done. It is absolutely done, because they have to follow these guidelines. But as you well know, there's ways to make it even more extreme than it needs to be. And there's a way to slow the roll, right? So I don't know who's in charge of hiring this person, but that's it. That's it. It's implemented. It's happening. It's happening right now. And the dollars are flowing, and, the nonprofits are popping up, and nobody knows who's approving this stuff. So then I had somebody contact me and say, you know what, the school sent me, she had been affected by the gender ideology because her child had been socially transitioned at school, and they did not inform her that this was happening. And she pulled her out and spent, a lot of us have spent thousands of hours and thousands of dollars, deprogramming our child out of a cult, really, so that they don't want to go towards hormones and all of that. And I talked to a lot of parents in Oklahoma. Their kids are 16, 17 years old. There's no help, and they're doing everything they can to prevent them from going to Planned Parenthood the day they turn 18 to access these cross-sex, hormones, or to go, get, a double mastectomy or any of that. So she sends me this thing, and she said at 9:00 on Friday night, they send out this email that they're going to be showing a suicide prevention video in class Monday morning. And, and you can opt out of it, but they don't have the video for you to preview. You don't want your child to be embarrassed and pulled out, or whatever. And you think, well, suicide prevention, that's a pretty good deal, right? But what's happening is, in the gender issues, they use suicide as a manipulation, and they emotionally blackmail the parents and say your child's going to commit suicide. Well, the child hears this, and it becomes a behavioral issue. Like, if I don't get my way, then I can I'll kill myself or something like that. Which is suicide is tragic. I've been deeply affected by suicide in my family, so I do understand the seriousness of this issue. So I started looking at this House Bill 4106. School Safety and Suicide Prevention Act that was passed. It's known as, I can't remember, it was touted as, it had some name that went along with it, but it requires each public school district in collaboration with a local mental health provider to define a mental health crisis. Okay. To define a mental health crisis, in quotes, and how those crises are identified. But what's a mental health crisis again? Now it's up to every single school district to define these things. And suicide prevention training and mental health resources and 988 and all of that stuff. So you got 77 counties now with 77 different, requirements around this. That again, it's based on evidence, evidence-based research. Well, what's evidence-based research? Gender-affirming care. So again, it's just the vagueness of how some of these bills are written. It's very easy to sneak these things in through the side door because evidence-based care always goes back to gender-affirming therapy.
Well, let me ask you, because we're at 46 minutes. So let me ask you, because there is a lot of mental health issues going on. I mean, that's what they're trying to do. The powers that be is create mental health crises in young people. What do you suggest to parents to do when confronted with something like this? I mean, if you had to do it all over again, now that you've studied and you've been in the middle of it, what do you advise parents to do?
Mm-hmm. Don't send them to therapy. Make sure that you vet the therapist very thoroughly, because it's very difficult to find a non-affirming therapist. But also, the problem is parents need these resources. They're not going to opt their child out of these resources. And they think, oh, this is going to be through the public school. No child will fall through the cracks now, and I'm going to be able to access this. I don't understand why the money's flowing to public school and not to the Department of Mental Health, who truly knows what this state needs.
And that's an excellent point.
And so now the public schools are in charge, and we already know that public schools aren't being very transparent on a lot of stuff. We already know how hard it is to get an IEP or a 504 plan and pushed around like that. So imagine now that they're in charge of deciding who gets mental health care. And mental health, the public schools should be supporting mental health. Mental health should not be supporting public schools, because one of the prime things about partial hospitalization is it takes the pressure off of school. So the child and the family can get to ground zero to see what is really, really going on with that child. Because, a lot of kids don't thrive in public school. They don't thrive in being, you're a homeschool advocate, and you understand, I think you guys, the people following you, understand that issue. But everyone I have talked to that have successfully gotten their children out of this, and I'm telling you, it's the middle school girls. That's our only way out of this situation. They're the most influenced. They're the ones that are dealing with their identity, which is a normal part of puberty and all of that. But once you get older than that, you're done. It's very difficult because these kids, it's a cult. It is a cult. And so you have to use cult-like techniques to pull these kids out of it. But so much of it is on social media and the internet, TikTok, Instagram, and all of that. You got to take the phones. You got to go through the social media. You have to, we took my daughter completely off the internet. She had no access for over a year. You got to be very aware, of what they're doing online. And a lot of stuff doesn't get filtered. The public school computers don't catch it because it's about ideology. So you can Google this stuff and everything. And it's hard to take the phones. I know that. But now they have phones that are the dummy phones where it's phone, text, things like that. Don't give a 13-year-old access to the world. They're not ready for it. That's the number one thing. The second thing is don't affirm. Do not affirm. Be very compassionate. Understand they're going through something. Work on those underlying issues. And the other thing that I would really suggest is family therapy, because that way you are in the room with the child and you know what the therapist is saying. And when we were looking through this, I had reached out to an organization, and this was a couple of years ago. There wasn't really any resources available, and they said, don't go to a therapist, And so finally we got to the point where we did need one. And I went to her several times myself to vet her and to see where she was at and the things that she would say. And, and I actually gave her the book about the transgender craze seducing our daughters. And she read it and she's like, yes, this is exactly what I'm seeing. I didn't know there was a book about this now.
Oh, wow.
And so when I felt safe enough to bring my child in there, we then had family therapy for a few sessions to really see where this is going to go before I even decided. And then I did allow her to have her own therapy. And then I booked my own session right after that, where we would continue to talk about it. So I knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And so I really kept a tight eye on what was going on. And I think that we're taught to trust the medical profession, to trust doctors and things like this. But what people don't understand is that American Medical Association and the American Association of Adolescent Psychiatrists has been completely overtaken by activists.
Yep.
And they fire anyone who tries to speak out about this or tries to expose it, gets fired. And so even public school at this point, with the introduction of gender identity, if your child is a vulnerable child, you have to wrap them in bubble wrap. And really, you need to know more about this than your child. You need to know all the terminology. You need to know what these words mean. You need to see it and see how it's coming in. So that way, if your child does, and you need to start talking to your child about it before somebody else gets to them, because that's the time to start planting the seed that no child is born in the wrong body.
Yeah.
Big Pharma is behind this 100% to make profits off of these kids, that are going to be lifetime patients, and on and on and on. And once you plant those seeds and make the association with the cult, it's easy for the child to understand what's coming at them. But one thing, I just found this out the other day, and it broke my heart. I met a detransitioner. She's from Oklahoma, and she was trans at 13, and she went on cross-sex hormones at 16. She actually went through a lot of the mental health facilities, the same ones in Oklahoma that we're familiar with, and they did affirm her. And they told her parents that if they didn't affirm her, she was going to die and all of this. And so she's telling me her story. And, she's forever going to have the deep voice. She's forever going to have the acne. She's married now and has a baby, a beautiful baby. But when she told me her story, it was exactly like my daughter. Exactly. Same
Wow.
age, same. And I asked her when this happened, and she said 2015. These facilities were practicing gender-affirming care in 2015. And here in 2020, I'm telling the legislatures, I'm talking to parental groups, I'm trying to educate parents. Nobody believed it was happening. They told me I had to prove it. All you got to do is go to their website. I mean, it's all right there, which I didn't realize at the time. But 2015. So how many girls has the state of Oklahoma transitioned?
Ruined.
They're to go on. I want to know how many federal dollars we're accepting to sell out our kids, because that's what we're doing.
Well, anything else? Any other questions, Michael?
No, I hate the fact that it happened at all, but I also hate the fact of kind of that initial social pressure, initial exposure, even not being able to monitor the school computer situation. I mean, God, so terrible.
There's this new organization I just found out about. It's called High Tops, and they're in New Jersey. I just saw this the other day, and they were caught Project Verita. I think they did an undercover expose on them, and they fully admitted that their goal is to be able to use more school computers to be able to talk to the kids about gender identity and pronouns without the parents finding out, because it'll be through the school computers. Wow. And anything that comes out about that, they always end up nationalizing it, so something to be aware of.
Well, I can't tell you thank you enough for coming on with us and talking about this, because it's, we've heard the same thing that you've heard, which is, prove it, or no, this isn't happening, or it's certainly not happening at my school, for fill in the blank, my teachers are great, and all on and on. And somebody's going to have to believe you and believe this to be true so that we can save our kids. And it does frustrate me. And beyond that, it infuriates me. I mean, it's beyond frustrating and infuriating that
a teacher just told me that they had to take a mandatory training in with the Trevor's Project curriculum. So the teachers are being forced. Yes. So the teachers are being forced to take this in the continuing education, for their careers.
Trevor Project, for those of you who watched our video with Denise, she told you how her daughter got sucked into the Trevor Project, or how, their particular Kansas public schools funneled the kids into the Trevor Project. So it's unconscionable that these people that we pay with our tax dollars will tell us every day of the week that school bond issues are for kids, and that we're horrible people and hate kids if we don't want school bonds, or if we don't want a new stadium, or if we don't want this or that. But this is what they're doing to our children. It's disgusting. Yeah. It's despicable.
Yeah.
Well, TS, thank you so much. And you might just plug your upcoming website, maybe?
LetKidsBeKidsOklahoma.org. It's going to be a resource for parents, educators, and therapists for non-affirming resources. They're very well vetted. I'm very familiar with all the organizations, the books, the documentaries, and we're trying to create a way for therapists who will be non-affirming for me to be able to partner them up with parents who are looking for that kind of care. So it should be launching here in the next couple of months, hopefully.
Well, again, thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us. And your daughter is doing better now, correct?
She's great. She's doing fantastic. We got her out of this. Lord. She's just a regular old teenage girl, doing her teenage girl stuff. It's great. I'm just so grateful.
And you know what? Way to go, Mom. Way to go. Way to hang in there and advocate for your child. So, God bless you. And we just pray that everything will continue to go well. So again, thanks for being on with us.
Thanks for having me. It was a real honor.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, TS.